In 1923, the Norwegian government passed a law that forced every family in the country to choose one surname and keep it forever, whether it told the truth about that family or not. If you carry a Norwegian surname today, on a mailbox in Minnesota, a driver's license in the Dakotas, a name tag at a Sons of Norway hall, someone in your family made that choice for you, nearly a century before you were born. Hansen, Olsen, two of the most Norwegian-sounding names in the entire country. And, as you are about to hear, two of the least reliable. 9 Norwegian surnames. 4 hidden histories folded into them. Viking patronymic, isolated farm, hidden kven, Sami, and one of these 9 belonged to families who were never supposed to be allowed a Norwegian name at all. Choosing one may be the only reason their descendants survived. We will get to that name, but first, a name that almost every Norwegian American family already carries without ever asking what it is actually confessing. For most Norwegian American families in the Midwest, the surname is the whole inheritance. Ole, Hansen, Olsen. 5 generations removed from a fjord nobody in the family has ever seen, and the name is treated as proof enough of who they are. The genetic structure of Norway does not agree with that assumption. Start with the name that is barely a name at all. It is an instruction, frozen mid-sentence. Hansen, Olsen. Every one of them ends the same way, and that ending is doing something most of the people who carry it have never noticed. The suffix means, quite literally, son of. Hansen is the son of Hans. Olsen is the son of Ole. Ole, the folk shortening of Olav, the name of 5 different Norwegian kings, one of them later canonized as the country's patron saint. Before 1923, this was not a family name at all. It reset every single generation. Hans Olsen's own son was not an Olsen. He was Hansen, son of Hans, and his son after that would be named for him in turn. The law in 1923 froze whatever patronymic a family happened to be using in that exact year. An accident of timing, not a bloodline, and handed it down as a surname for every generation after, forever. Before that year, this was never written down in one central place. A parish clerk in a wooden church on a fjord kept the record, by hand, updating the father's name every time a child was born. The clerk, who happened to be sitting at that desk in 1923, decided, without meaning to, what an entire family would be called for the next 100 years. That single clerk's paperwork is now the most common surname pattern on mailboxes across Minnesota and North Dakota. Not a lineage, a snapshot, taken at random and never updated again. If your own name is a Hansen or an Olsen, you have been walking around your whole life as technically someone's son. And the law never asked which someone mattered enough to remember. Nobody ever told the Hansen family in Fargo or the Olsen family in Duluth that the name on their own door is a coin flip from a single bureaucratic year, not a record of who came before it. That silence was never their fault. It was simply never anyone's job to say it out loud until geneticists started mapping the country that name came from. That is one name. 8 more are waiting, and the next one belongs to families who never had to guess where they came from because they never left. In the deep valleys of southern Norway, Setesdal, inland Agder, the high dales of Telemark, there are families whose surname is not a father's name at all. It is the ground itself. Berg, mountain, Dahl, valley. 2 of the plainest surnames in the entire country, and underneath both sits something the patronymic families cannot claim. A large genetic study of the Norwegian population. Over 6,000 people, genotyped and mapped county by county, found something the researchers had not expected going in. Certain valleys in the south showed almost no genetic mixing with the rest of the country for hundreds of years. The counties named in that finding were Rogaland, Agder, and Telemark. Exactly the region where farm name surnames like Berg and Dahl are still most concentrated today. Mountain ridges do what oceans do. They stop people from marrying out. Generation after generation, the same handful of families intermarried inside the same handful of valleys, and the genome kept a record no paperwork ever needed to write down. If your name is Berg or Dahl, the odds that your direct ancestors simply never left one valley for centuries are higher than for almost any patronymic name in the country. Not because the valley was proud of purity, because the mountains made leaving hard and staying easy. Picture a Berg family 200 years ago in a farmhouse in Telemark. Exactly the pattern that 6,000-person study found, generation after generation, never leaving the valley. Able to name a dozen ancestors without needing a single archive to check. That family's descendants scattered across Wisconsin and Minnesota carry something a Hansen family cannot claim with the same confidence. Not a better bloodline, a more concentrated one. Many of them ended up running dairy farms in exactly the kind of isolated rural county their ancestors had already spent centuries perfecting. Different hills, same instinct for staying put. If a name that concentrated is the kind of thing this channel exists to dig up, subscribe. The next name on this list was never supposed to survive at all. The 1923 law did not just freeze names. It also handed a weapon to a policy that had already been running for 70 years. Starting in the 1850s, the Norwegian state ran a decades-long program aimed at one goal: making two minorities inside its own borders stop looking like themselves. The indigenous Sami and the Kven, descendants of Finnish-speaking settlers who had been arriving in the far north since the 1500s. A Sami child in a schoolyard in Finnmark could be punished simply for speaking the language her own grandmother had taught her. That was the everyday shape of the policy. Not a headline, a schoolyard. A land law passed in 1902 went further still. In the far north, it tied the right to buy your own family's land to speaking Norwegian at home, and, in practice, to a name that sounded Norwegian too. So some families did exactly that. Mortensen, Andreassen, two more patronymic surnames, indistinguishable on paper from any Hansen or Olsen in the country. Except that for some of the families who carry them in Troms and Finnmark today, the name was not inherited by accident of timing. It was chosen, deliberately, to disappear. Picture the moment itself. A father standing at a magistrate's desk in a town on the Arctic coast, giving up a Kven or Sami name his own father had used and writing down a Norwegian one instead. Not out of shame, because the alternative was watching his children lose the right to the land the family had worked for generations. If your name is Mortensen or Andreassen and your family traces to the far north of Norway, the surname itself cannot tell you which story is yours. A Norwegian name taken by a Norwegian family, or a Norwegian name taken by a Kven family who needed one to survive. From the mailbox alone, the two are identical on purpose. In 2023, a century after the naming law itself, Norway's own Truth and Reconciliation Commission formally documented the injustices done to Kven and Sami families under that assimilation policy, and the country's parliament apologized. Stop and think about what that apology is actually admitting. Somewhere in a family reunion in Minnesota right now, three cousins can be sitting at the same table, all three carrying a common Norwegian, Sen surname, and one of them is descended from a great-grandparent who took that exact name to stop being seen as Kven. None of the three would know it from the name alone. Here is the catch in all of this, and it is a fair one. A commercial DNA kit cannot open an envelope and hand you your surname's private history. That is not how any of this works. What the science actually shows is population level. A large sample of people from a region compared against a large sample from another region, revealing patterns that hold true for the group. Not a courtroom-grade fact about any single family's private past. Your specific Mortensen household may trace entirely to Norwegian farmers with no Kven ancestor at all. Or it may not. The surname does not decide that. The choice your great-great-grandparents made under pressure generations ago is the only thing that does. And most families were never told which choice was theirs. Keep that honesty in mind, because the last name on this list needs it more than any other. In the far north, above the Arctic Circle, there is a lineage older than the word Norway itself. Hætta, Somby, Utsi, 3 Sami surnames, carried by reindeer-herding families around Kautokeino and Karasjok for longer than any patronymic on this list has existed. Kautokeino and Karasjok sit on open tundra, above the tree line, where the same families have moved reindeer herds between the coast and the interior on a seasonal rhythm older than any border drawn across it. Tens of thousands of people in Norway still identify as Sami today. The A in Hætta is not a typo. It is a letter from a language that was almost legislated out of existence and is still being spoken. Unlike Mortensen or Andreassen, these names were never chosen to hide. They survived the assimilation policy on purpose, in families willing to lose land and standing rather than trade the name for safety. The same assimilation program went after the joik, the centuries-old Sami form of singing a person or a place into existence, and tried to have it banned outright as a pagan relic. Families who kept the name kept the song too, low and private, on the same reindeer migration routes their ancestors had walked for 1,000 years before Norway existed as a country at all. Some of the same ships that carried the Hansens and the Olsens across the Atlantic carried Sami families as well. They landed on paperwork that recorded them simply as Norwegian citizens. No box on the form for who they actually were. A number of them went further north, still, into Alaska, brought over deliberately in the 1890s to teach reindeer herding to the territory's own indigenous communities. Their descendants are there today, in a landscape that reminded their great-grandparents enough of home to make the crossing worth it. Picture a Sami grandmother in Kautokeino, herding on the same route her own grandmother walked, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. Genetic studies of Sami populations have found something researchers still describe as one of the most distinct signatures in Europe, carried quietly inside women, exactly like her. It traces back toward ancient Uralic-speaking populations of Siberia. Researchers have measured that Siberian component as high as roughly 30% in some Sami samples. Layered onto a European base, but never fully absorbed by it, no document ever needed to say so. A grandson of that same family might end up on a reindeer ranch in Alaska or a college campus in Minneapolis, still carrying it. Neither of them would ever guess it from a photograph, a passport, or a surname on a school roster. A separate study comparing the Sami directly against populations of the Volga-Ural region of Russia found a genetic link between the two groups too specific to be coincidence. The same broad Sami population has also been shown, through mitochondrial and Y chromosome analysis, to carry both a Western European lineage and a distinct Eastern one. Genetic outliers among Europeans in a way almost no other population on the continent can claim. None of that shows up if you are only reading a surname. It shows up in the genome underneath it, in families who kept a name every policy in Oslo wanted erased. Norway did not formally apologize to those families, or open a Sami parliament of their own, until 1989, within living memory of people who are still walking the same herding routes today. If your family carries Hætta, or Somby, or Utsi, the lineage underneath your own name is, more likely than almost any other name on this list, a continuous thread stretching back before Rome had a word for this part of the world. The names that sound the most Norwegian are the ones the DNA understands the least. The ones you almost couldn't pronounce are the ones that never stop being Norway. 9 names. 4 different stories, sewn into a single naming law that pretended every Norwegian surname meant the same thing, and none of it stayed in Norway. A Hansen, frozen mid-sentence by an accident of timing in 1923, and carried west by one of the 800,000 Norwegians who sailed for America between 1825 and 1925. A Berg or a Dahl, shaped by mountains that made leaving harder than staying, until leaving was exactly what one branch of the family finally did. A Mortensen or an Andreassen, chosen on purpose by a family who needed to disappear to survive, disappearing a second time into Minnesota and the Dakotas. A Hætta, a Somby, an Utsi that refused to disappear at all, on either side of the ocean. The name on your own mailbox does not tell you who you are. It tells you which of these 4 choices your family was standing inside of in 1923. And it makes no difference which side of the Atlantic you are standing on now, reading this in Fargo or Duluth instead of a fjord. A Hansen family in Fargo, carrying a coin-flip patronymic without knowing it. A Dahl family in Wisconsin, carrying 11 unbroken generations of one valley without knowing it. A Mortensen family anywhere in the Midwest, carrying a great-grandparent's quiet act of survival. A Hætta or a Somby family, wherever they ended up, carrying a lineage older than the country their neighbors assume they came from without knowing it either. None of them chose the silence. The naming law simply never came with an explanation attached. In 1923, the Norwegian government passed a law that forced every family in the country to choose one surname and keep it forever, whether it told the truth about that family or not. It was never just paperwork. It was a snapshot taken mid-sentence of 4 different ways a family had already learned to survive in that country. And 100 years and 1 ocean later, millions of people are still carrying that snapshot on their own front door. If you want more of these hidden bloodlines sitting inside ordinary names, subscribe. And turn the bell on so the next one finds you. The same naming law that froze a Norwegian family's true story under an ordinary surname was written by the descendants of the last Vikings to ever reach American soil. And DNA says almost none of those first Norse settlers left a living descendant behind at all. That story is already on your screen. Open it